Found out that my dad who neglected me isn't my biological dad. I've been hesitant to share this story, but after processing it for a while, I feel like I need to get it off my chest. It's been one of the most surreal experiences of my life, and even now, as I type it out, I'm still trying to wrap my head around everything. For most of my life, I thought I knew who my dad was. He wasn't the most present father, to put it lightly. Growing up, I always felt like he had one foot out the door. He was emotionally distant, barely around, and when he was, it felt like he didn't want to be. I always chalked it up to him being busy with work or maybe just not being the nurturing type. I figured that some dads were like that, not everyone's family is warm and fuzzy. Still, it hurt, and I always felt like I had to work extra hard to get his attention, to make him proud. But it never seemed to work. My mom, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. She was my rock. Always there for me, always supportive, and we were really close. I didn't question much about my family dynamic because it had always been that way. It just seemed normal to me. My mom picked up the slack where my dad didn't, and I figured that was just how things were going to be. Fast forward to a few months ago. My dad and I had been more or less estranged for the past couple of years. After I graduated high school, I moved out and didn't look back. Our relationship was strained, and I didn't feel the need to keep trying when it was clear he wasn't interested in being a part of my life. Every once in a while, he'd call, usually on holidays or my birthday, but it was always the same, short, awkward conversations that left me feeling worse than before. My mom and I were still close, though. We'd talk all the time, and I never once doubted our bond. Then, out of the blue, my mom sat me down one night after dinner and told me there was something important she needed to talk to me about. I could tell she was nervous, which immediately set off alarm bells in my head. She's not the type to beat around the bush, so for her to be acting this way, I knew it had to be serious. She took a deep breath and started by telling me how much she loved me and how proud she was of the person I'd become. She kept saying how she'd always wanted what was best for me, and she hoped I'd understand why she'd kept certain things from me all these years. At this point, my mind was racing, but I still had no idea what she was getting at. Then she dropped the bombshell. She told me that the man I'd always known as my dad wasn't actually my biological father. I just sat there, stunned. I didn't know what to say. I think I was in shock because the words weren't really sinking in at first. She kept talking, explaining how when she was younger, she'd been in a relationship with someone else before she met my dad. It hadn't worked out, and when she found out she was pregnant with me, the guy didn't want anything to do with it. My dad, the man I'd always thought was my dad, had been there for her, and they'd gotten together shortly after. He knew she was pregnant, and according to her, he'd agreed to raise me as his own. But that's not what happened. Not really. I think, deep down, I'd always sensed something wasn't right between us, but I never imagined it was something like this. As my mom was telling me everything, I could see how much pain it caused her to admit it. She said she'd always hoped that my dad would come around, that he'd eventually treat me like his own flesh and blood, but it never happened. And she regretted it. She said she regretted not telling me sooner, but she didn't want to hurt me. She thought maybe things would get better, but they didn't. I was angry. Not just at her for keeping this from me but at him, too. How could he agree to raise me and then treat me like I was just some burden he had to tolerate? I felt like my whole life had been a lie. All the times I'd tried to get his approval, all the times I'd bent over backward to make him proud, it was all for nothing. He'd never see me as his kid because, in his mind, I wasn't. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying my entire childhood in my head, trying to make sense of everything. It explained so much, the coldness, the distance, the way he'd always seemed like he was just going through the motions with me. I was devastated, but at the same time, I felt a strange sense of relief. At least now I had an explanation for why he'd never been the dad I'd needed him to be. The next few weeks were a blur. I went back and forth between being furious with my mom for keeping such a huge secret from me and feeling grateful that she finally told me the truth. She gave me the option to find my biological father, but I wasn't sure I wanted to. Part of me was curious, but another part of me was terrified of opening that door. What if he didn't want anything to do with me either? I eventually decided to go for it. I had to know. My mom had enough information for me to track him down, and after a lot of soul-searching, I made the decision to reach out. I sent a carefully worded message, not expecting much. To my surprise, he responded quickly. He seemed excited, even. He wanted to meet me, and I agreed, although I was nervous as hell. When we finally met, it was surreal. He looked like me. There were so many little things about him that I recognized in myself, and that was something I'd never felt with my dad before. The conversation was a bit awkward at first, but he was warm and genuinely seemed happy to meet me. He explained that back then, he'd been young and stupid and scared, and he regretted not being there for me. I wasn't sure how to feel about that. On one hand, I was angry that he'd abandoned my mom and me, but on the other hand, I could see that he truly regretted it. We've kept in touch since then, but I'm still trying to figure out where he fits into my life. It's been a lot to process. I'm not looking to replace the man I grew up with, even if he wasn't a great dad, but I also can't ignore the fact that my biological father is out there, wanting to have a relationship with me. As for my dad, the one who raised me, I haven't confronted him yet. I don't know if I want to. Part of me wants to scream at him for being so cold and distant all those years, for making me feel like I was never enough. But another part of me just feels sad for him. He had the opportunity to be my dad, and he chose not to. That's on him. Update: so, after sitting on this for a few months, I finally decided to confront my dad. I wasn't sure how it was going to go, and honestly, I was bracing myself for a huge blow-up. But when I called him and asked if we could talk, he sounded neutral? Like he wasn't surprised. That threw me off a bit, but I went ahead and met him for coffee. The conversation was weird, to say the least. I told him I knew the truth, that I wasn't his biological child, and I asked him why he'd agreed to raise me if he was just going to treat me like I didn't matter. His response was a mix of indifference and frustration. He said he felt pressured by my mom and her family, that he hadn't really wanted to be a father, but he'd done his duty by providing for us financially. He said he didn't know how to connect with me because I wasn't his, and it was hard for him to bond with a kid he didn't feel a connection to. That hurt. I don't know what I was expecting, but hearing him say it out loud made everything feel so much worse. I told him how much it had hurt me growing up, always feeling like I wasn't good enough, and he just kind of shrugged. He apologized, but it felt half-hearted, like he was just saying it because he knew he should, not because he actually meant it. I left that conversation feeling more confused than ever. I'd always hoped that maybe, deep down, he cared about me in some way, even if he wasn't great at showing it. But now, I'm not so sure. It feels like he saw me as more of an obligation than anything else. Since then, we haven't spoken much. I think we both know there's no real relationship there, and I'm starting to come to terms with that. I've been focusing more on building a relationship with my biological father, and that's been going surprisingly well. It's still awkward at times, and we're figuring things out as we go, but he's trying, and that means a lot to me. It's not perfect, but it's a start. I'm still processing everything, and I'm not sure what the future holds for my relationships with either of my dads. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm starting to get some closure. And for now, that's enough. Get lifetime access to my prompts library, https://bit.ly/4@9kn. Final update: it's been a few months since my last update, and I wanted to share where things stand now. To say it's been a roller coaster would be an understatement, but I feel like I've finally come to a place of peace with everything. After that last conversation with the man who raised me, I didn't reach out again. It was hard at first. There were days when I would stare at my phone, wondering if I should try again, if maybe there was something left to salvage. But every time I thought about how indifferent he was, how little he seemed to care, I realized it wasn't worth the emotional toll. Some people just aren't capable of being what you need them to be, and that's okay. It doesn't make it hurt any less, but I'm learning to accept that I can't change him or his feelings about me. I think what really helped me move on was shifting my focus to my biological father. I was hesitant at first to let him into my life, but over the past few months, things have changed in ways I didn't expect. We've spent a lot of time together, meeting up for coffee, talking about the years we missed, even introducing him to some of my friends. It's been strange, in a way, getting to know someone who feels both familiar and like a stranger at the same time. He's been open about his regrets, which was something I needed to hear. I don't think I realized how much I needed an apology, an acknowledgement that he had messed up by not being there for me. And while no apology can make up for the lost time, it did help to hear him take responsibility. He's not perfect, no one is, but I appreciate that he's trying. I can see the effort he's making, and that counts for a lot. What surprised me the most is how natural it feels to be around him now. At first, I worried that I'd always feel awkward, like I was forcing a relationship that wasn't really there. But the more we've hung out, the more comfortable it's become. We've started developing inside jokes, and I've noticed small quirks we share, things I didn't even realize I'd been missing. He still has a lot to learn about me, and I have a lot to learn about him, but it feels like we're on the right path. One of the biggest breakthroughs came when we talked about the future. He admitted that he was scared I'd cut him off after getting to know him, that I'd decide it was too late for us to have any sort of bond. I hadn't even thought about that, but when he said it, it hit me how much this relationship means to him too. He's just as nervous as I am, but we're both committed to making it work. There's something really healing in knowing that he wants me in his life as much as I want to give him a chance. On the flip side, my relationship with my mom has been complicated. We've always been close, but there's this unspoken tension now. It's not that I'm angry with her anymore, I've come to terms with the choices she made. But I think she's struggling with guilt, and that's something I can't fix for her. We've had a few deep conversations where she's tried to explain why she did what she did, but I can tell she's holding back, probably because she's afraid of reopening old wounds. I've told her that I forgive her, and I do. But forgiveness doesn't erase the fact that our relationship has changed. I think it'll take some time for both of us to figure out what our new normal looks like. In a way, I feel like I've become more independent, less reliant on her for emotional support, which is a good thing. I'm carving out my own space now, learning how to stand on my own 2 feet without needing constant validation from either of my parents. There was one moment that really hit home for me recently. My biological father invited me to a family gathering, just a casual barbecue with some of his relatives. I was nervous because I wasn't sure how I'd fit in, but when I got there, everyone was so welcoming. They knew who I was and seemed genuinely happy to meet me. I even met a couple of half-siblings I didn't know existed. We talked, laughed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. That feeling of belonging is something I've been chasing for so long, and it's bittersweet to finally have it in a place I never expected. I think, deep down, I had always hoped I'd find that sense of family with the dad I grew up with, but it never happened. Now, I've found it with people who are, in a way, strangers, yet they've accepted me as one of their own without hesitation. It's been healing in a way I didn't know I needed. I'm not saying everything's perfect. There are still days when I get overwhelmed by the weight of it all, the fractured relationships, the years of feeling unwanted by the man who raised me. But I'm in a better place now. I've stopped looking for closure from him because I realize I don't need it. The closure I needed came from within, from understanding that his issues weren't about me, they were about him. I've spent so much of my life trying to be good enough for him, trying to earn love that wasn't mine to earn. Now, I'm focusing on the people who actually want me in their lives. As for the future, I'm hopeful. I'm continuing to build my relationship with my biological father, and I'm taking things one step at a time with my mom. I've learned a lot through this process, about forgiveness, about boundaries, and about letting go of things that aren't serving me. Most of all, I've learned that family isn't just about blood or who raised you. It's about who shows up, who cares, and who makes the effort to be in your life. I don't know what the future holds for me and my biological dad, but I'm optimistic. We're planning a trip together soon, just the 2 of us, and I'm excited to spend more time with him. It still feels weird sometimes to say dad when referring to him, but I think I'm getting used to it. There's a part of me that's still healing, still figuring things out, but I finally feel like I'm on the right track. To anyone who's reading this and dealing with complicated family dynamics, I just want to say, it's okay to feel lost. It's okay to not have all the answers right away. Healing takes time, and it's a messy, non-linear process. But it's also worth it. Surround yourself with the people who make you feel seen and valued, and let go of the ones who don't. Life's too short to keep chasing after people who aren't willing to meet you halfway. Thanks for following along on this journey with me. I never expected to get so much support from strangers on the internet, but your kind words and encouragement have meant more than I can express. This might be the end of this chapter of my story, but it's also the beginning of a new one, and for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful about what's to come.